A struggling single dad helps a stranger on the street, missing the job interview that could change his daughter's life. But what he doesn't know, she's a billionaire CEO, and she's about to turn his world upside down. Was his act of kindness a mistake, or the best decision of his life? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Lucas Bennett's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., though he'd been awake for 20 minutes already, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that resembled a question mark. Fitting, he thought, for a day that would determine so much of their future. "Dad?" Penny's small voice called from the doorway of his bedroom. Her dark hair stuck out in wild directions, and she clutched her worn stuffed astronaut doll. "Today's the big day, right?" Lucas sat up, forcing brightness into his voice. "That's right, kiddo. The very big day." He swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Why are you up so early?" "I couldn't sleep. I was too excited." She bounced on her toes. "Can I help make breakfast?" "Absolutely." He ruffled her hair as he passed. "But first, let's tame this mop, astronaut." Their morning routine unfolded in the cramped one-bedroom apartment. Lucas had converted the living room into his sleeping area 3 years ago, giving Penny the only proper bedroom. The kitchen barely fit them both, but they'd perfected their dance. Penny setting out plates while Lucas scrambled eggs, both of them humming the same tune from her bedtime song. "Remember, Ms. Garcia is picking you up from school today," Lucas said, adjusting his only tie in the bathroom mirror. The navy blue fabric was fraying slightly at the edges, but it would have to do. "Because you'll be at your new job," Penny said confidently, mouth full of toast. Lucas caught his own eyes in the mirror. "Well, the interview, but I've got a good feeling about this one." As Penny brushed her teeth, Lucas's gaze drifted to the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. The red past due stamps seemed to glow under the kitchen lights. He quickly tucked them into a drawer when Penny emerged from the bathroom. "How do I look?" he asked, arms outstretched. Penny studied him critically. "Your tie is crooked." She reached up, her small fingers attempting to straighten it. "There. Now you look like a boss." "I'll settle for looking like someone a boss would want to hire." He knelt down to her level. "Penny, I want you to know that no matter what happens today, things are going to get better," she finished for him, dimples appearing with her smile. "You always say that." "Because it's true." He tapped her nose. "And after today, I really think they will." After dropping Penny at school, Lucas navigated the subway with practiced efficiency, clutching his worn leather portfolio containing his resume and references. The financial district loomed ahead as he emerged from the station, glass towers reflecting the morning sun. Winters Enterprises occupied one of the tallest buildings, a gleaming monument to success that made his stomach tighten. Lucas checked his watch. 30 minutes early. Perfect. He weaved through the morning crowd, professionals in expensive suits streaming past with coffee cups and blank expressions. 3 blocks from his destination, a commotion caught his attention. A young woman in jeans and a simple sweater knelt on the sidewalk, frantically gathering oranges that rolled in every direction from split-paper grocery bags. Business people flowed around her like water around a rock, some stepping over her purchases without breaking stride. Lucas checked his watch again. 25 minutes, plenty of time. Then he noticed a man in an expensive suit deliberately kick an orange into the street as he passed. Lucas's jaw tightened. He changed course. "Let me help you with that," he said, kneeling beside the woman. Up close, he noticed her striking blue eyes and the flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. "Thank you," she said quietly. The bag just gave way. Together, they corralled the escaped produce. Lucas gathered the remaining groceries while she collected the torn bags. "Here," he said, offering his portfolio to hold the smaller items. "We can use this as a temporary container." "Oh, I couldn't. It's just a folder. Your eggs are more important." A small smile touched her lips as they continued gathering items. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same orange, and Lucas felt an unexpected jolt of connection. Her eyes met his, surprise reflecting in them too. "I think that's everything," Lucas said, helping her arrange the salvaged groceries. "I can't thank you enough," she said. "No one else even slowed down." "No problem at all." Lucas glanced at his watch and felt his heart sink. The delay had cost more time than he'd realized. "I'm sorry, but I really have to." "Of course," she nodded. "You're obviously on your way somewhere important." "Job interview," he explained, already backing away. "I hope your day gets better." He turned and rushed toward the Winters building, weaving through the crowd with new urgency. The woman called something after him, but her voice was lost in the noise of the city. Lucas glanced at his watch again and broke into a run. Catherine Winters watched the kind stranger disappear into the morning crowd, his tall figure quickly swallowed by the sea of suits and briefcases. She stood there a moment longer, groceries awkwardly bundled in her arms, struck by the unexpected encounter. "A job interview," she murmured to herself, looking down at the hastily gathered items. In a city renowned for its indifference, his simple act of kindness felt extraordinary. Catherine shifted the groceries and continued toward her apartment building, nodding at the doorman who rushed to help her. "Ms. Winters, let me assist you with those." "Thank you, Frank," she said, surrendering the precarious bundle. "Paper bags aren't what they used to be." "Would you like me to have these sent up to your penthouse?" "Please. I need to get to the office." Catherine glanced at her watch. "I'm already running late." In the elevator to her penthouse, Catherine leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. These rare mornings when she ventured out anonymously were precious, moments of normalcy stolen from her tightly scheduled life. As the CEO of Winters Enterprises, her face rarely appeared in public. She preferred it that way. The casual clothes, the simple errand, these small deceptions allowed her glimpses of an ordinary life. An hour later, Catherine stepped out of her private elevator at Winters Enterprises, transformed. Her casual attire had been replaced by an impeccably tailored navy suit, her chestnut hair swept into an elegant chignon. The few employees she passed straightened instinctively, offering respectful nods. "Good morning, Ms. Winters," her assistant said, falling into step beside her. "Your first meeting is in 20 minutes. The quarterly reports are on your desk, and HR has scheduled interviews for the financial analyst position today." "Thank you, Diane." Catherine paused at her office door. "Actually, could you ask Victoria from HR to see me before my first meeting?" 10 minutes later, Victoria Chen, HR director, entered Catherine's office with a tablet in hand. "You wanted to see me about the interviews, Ms. Winters?" Catherine looked up from her computer. "Yes. How many candidates do we have today?" 5 scheduled, though only 4 showed up." Victoria swiped through her tablet. The 9 a.m. was a no-show. Lucas Bennett. Catherine's fingers stilled on her keyboard. "Bennett? Did he call to reschedule?" No communication at all. Victoria's tone conveyed her disapproval. "We've already sent the standard rejection email. Unprofessional behavior is an automatic disqualification, as per company policy." Catherine turned to her window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. "This Bennett, do we have his resume?" Victoria looked surprised, but quickly pulled up the file. Bachelor's in Finance from CUNY, 5 years at Meridian Financial before they downsized. Decent recommendations, but nothing extraordinary. Single parent, which might explain the reliability issues. Catherine took the tablet, studying the photograph. Kind brown eyes looked back at her from the screen. The same eyes that had met hers on the sidewalk. "He was helping someone," Catherine said quietly. "That's why he missed the interview." "I'm sorry." Catherine handed back the tablet. "Find his contact information. I'd like to speak with him personally." "But Ms. Winters, we have a clear policy." "Victoria." Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. "Please." After Victoria left, Catherine stood at her window, watching the tiny figures moving on the streets below. How many moments of kindness went unnoticed every day? How many good people were punished for their decency? The thought troubled her more than she expected. Meanwhile, Lucas stared at the email on his phone, the rejection from Winters Enterprises glowing coldly in the dimly lit kitchen. He'd known it was coming. Missing the interview had sealed his fate. But seeing the formal dismissal still felt like a punch to the gut. "Is the spaghetti okay, Dad?" Penny asked, twirling noodles around her fork. Lucas quickly set his phone face down. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Just like Mom used to make." "No, it's not," Penny said matter-of-factly. "Mom didn't burn the garlic bread." Despite everything, Lucas laughed. "You got me there." "Did you get the job?" Penny asked, her eyes hopeful. Lucas hesitated. "Not this one, Penny girl, but there will be others." Her small face fell slightly before she rallied. "That's okay. They probably weren't nice anyway." "Maybe not," Lucas agreed, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Eat your dinner before it gets cold." Later, after tucking Penny into bed with a story and her favorite stuffed astronaut, Lucas returned to the kitchen. He pulled an envelope from the mail pile he'd been avoiding all evening. The bold red lettering across the front read, "Final Notice." Lucas opened it with shaking hands. The eviction warning stated they had 30 days to pay the 3 months of back rent or vacate the apartment. He sank into a chair, the paper crumpling in his fist. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like the moon, was a photograph of him and Penny at Coney Island last summer, both grinning with ice-cream-stained smiles. "I'll figure something out," he whispered to the silent apartment. "I promise." The envelope bore the embossed letterhead of Harrison and Harrison Law Associates, a detail that made Lucas's stomach tighten before he even broke the seal. He'd been expecting this, in some corner of his mind. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Standing in his small kitchen, Lucas unfolded the crisp, expensive paper and began to read. "Dear Mr. Bennett," the letter began with cold formality. "On behalf of our clients, Edward and Margaret Harrison, we are writing to formally request a revision to the current visitation arrangement regarding their granddaughter, Penelope Bennett." Lucas's eyes skipped to the middle paragraph, where the true purpose lay. "Given your continued financial instability, which our clients have observed with increasing concern, they believe more structured involvement in Penelope's life would be beneficial to her long-term welfare and development." The final paragraph landed like a hammer. "Should an amicable agreement not be reached, our clients are prepared to petition the court for a formal custody evaluation. We look forward to your prompt response." Lucas set the letter down, his hand trembling slightly. The Harrisons had never approved of him, had always seen him as beneath their daughter. After Rachel's death, they'd maintained a cold civility for Penny's sake. But this was the move he'd always feared. "Dad, I can't find my space project," Penny called from her bedroom. Lucas quickly tucked the letter into his pocket. "Check under your bed, honey. We need to leave in 5 minutes." The elementary school bustled with morning activity as Lucas walked Penny to her classroom, her small hand warm in his. "Remember, Ms. Garcia wants to talk to all the parents about the museum trip," Penny said, bouncing slightly with each step. "It's to the planetarium. Can I go? Please." "We'll see, Penny girl," Lucas said, forcing a smile. "I need to hear the details first." Near the classroom, a cluster of parents stood chatting, their conversation drifting toward Lucas as he approached. $50 per student, but it includes lunch and the IMAX show, a mother in expensive yoga wear was saying. "Plus another 20 for the gift shop," added another parent, though Charlotte always manages to spend twice that. They laughed, The sound of people for whom $50 was a minor consideration, not a week's worth of groceries. Lucas felt the letter burning in his pocket as he knelt to hug Penny goodbye. "Have a great day, astronaut. Learn something amazing." "I always do." Penny grinned, revealing the gap where her front tooth had been. She dashed into the classroom without a backward glance. Lucas watched her go, then turned away from the parent group, avoiding a conversation where he'd have to pretend $50 wasn't an impossible sum right now. 3 hours and 2 unsuccessful job applications later, Lucas sat on a bench in Bryant Park, laptop balanced on his knees as he customized yet another cover letter. His phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Bennett, this is Diane Roberts from Winters Enterprises." Lucas straightened. "Yes, hello. I'm calling because we'd like to invite you to interview for a position in our financial analysis department. It's different from the role you originally applied for, more aligned with your experience at Meridian." Lucas frowned. "I appreciate the call, but I missed my interview. Your company already sent a rejection email." "Yes, well," the woman's voice softened slightly. "Sometimes circumstances warrant reconsideration. Would tomorrow at 2 p.m. work for you?" Lucas hesitated. This made no sense. Companies like Winters didn't give second chances, especially to candidates who missed interviews. Was this some kind of mistake? Or worse, a cruel prank? But with the Harrisons' letter and Penny's school trip looming, could he afford to question this opportunity? "Mr. Bennett?" "Yes, sorry. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. would be perfect. Thank you." After hanging up, Lucas stared at his phone. Something felt off about this sudden reversal, but desperation drowned out his suspicion. This might be his last chance. In her office, 50 floors above the city, Catherine Winters handed a folder back to her assistant. "Everything's arranged," Diane confirmed. "He'll interview with the financial team first, then meet with you at 3 p.m. "Perfect." Catherine tapped her desk thoughtfully. "When you set up the meeting, list me as Catherine Wells, Department Director. No need to mention my actual position." Diane raised an eyebrow but knew better than to question her boss's methods. "Of course, Ms. Winters." "And Diane, find out everything you can about Edward and Margaret Harrison. They're Penny Bennett's maternal grandparents." After Diane left, Catherine turned to her window, watching the city below. She rarely used her position for personal curiosity, but something about Lucas Bennett's situation, and his kindness despite that situation, had captured her interest. Meeting him as CEO would create an imbalance, a barrier to seeing his true character. And Catherine had learned long ago that people revealed their true selves when they thought no one important was watching. Day has arrived. Lucas straightened his tie for the 3rd time as the elevator climbed toward the executive floors of Winters Enterprises. His reflection in the polished doors showed a man trying desperately to project confidence while anxiety churned beneath the surface. The suit he wore, his only one, had been carefully steamed the night before, but he knew it couldn't hide the worn edges at the cuffs. 35th floor, announced the elevator's automated voice. Taking a deep breath, Lucas stepped into a reception area of gleaming glass and steel. A sleek desk stood before floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Manhattan's skyline. "Lucas Bennett for the 2 p.m. interview," he told the receptionist, who directed him to a conference room where 2 men and a woman in impeccable suits waited. For the next 45 minutes, Lucas answered questions about financial modeling, risk assessment, and market trends. Despite his nerves, the familiar territory of finance calmed him. Numbers had always made sense to him in a way people sometimes didn't. "Your analysis of the Meridian portfolio restructuring was impressive," said the oldest interviewer, checking his notes. "Though unorthodox. Sometimes unorthodox approaches reveal opportunities others miss," Lucas replied, surprised by his own confidence. The panel exchanged glances. "We have one more person who'd like to meet you," the woman said. "She'll be here shortly." Left alone, Lucas stood to stretch his legs, gazing out at the city below. The view from this height transformed the street where he'd helped the woman with her groceries into a tiny ribbon between towering buildings. The door opened behind him. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Catherine Wells, Director of Strategic Initiatives." Lucas turned and froze. Standing before him was the woman from the street, the one whose oranges he'd chased. Her chestnut hair was now elegantly styled, casual clothes replaced by a tailored navy dress that spoke of authority and taste. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he managed, extending his hand without revealing his recognition. "Likewise." Her handshake was firm, her blue eyes studying him with quiet intensity. "Please sit." As they settled across from each other, Catherine opened a folder. "I've been reviewing your application. Your background is quite interesting." "Thank you," Lucas said cautiously. "Tell me," she continued, "what would you say demonstrates character in the financial world?" The question wasn't what he'd expected. Honesty when it's inconvenient. Making ethical choices even when no one's watching. He paused. "Like stopping to help someone who's dropped their oranges, even when you're running late." Their eyes met. A small smile touched her lips. "Yes, exactly like that," she said softly. "Sometimes small actions reveal more than grand gestures." The tension in Lucas's shoulders eased slightly. She remembered him. What followed wasn't the interview Lucas had prepared for. Instead of drilling him on technical knowledge, Catherine posed hypothetical scenarios that tested both financial acumen and ethical judgment. Their conversation flowed naturally as they debated investment strategies and corporate responsibility. "Your approach balances profit with principles," Catherine noted. "That's refreshingly rare." "Profit without principles isn't sustainable," Lucas replied. "I learned that at Meridian when they started cutting corners." Catherine leaned forward. "Is that why you left?" Lucas hesitated. "I was asked to overlook some questionable practices. I refused. They found someone more flexible." "And you've been job hunting since?" "For 3 months now." Catherine studied him for a moment before closing her folder. "I think we've covered enough ground. Do you have any questions for me?" Lucas asked about the company culture and the specific role, receiving thoughtful answers that made the position sound increasingly ideal. Perhaps too ideal for someone in his desperate situation. As they finished, Catherine glanced at her watch. "We're headed in the same direction. Shall we share the elevator?" In the confined space, Lucas became acutely aware of her perfume, something subtle and expensive, and the way she stood just close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. The elevator felt smaller than it had on the way up. "I have some time," Catherine said suddenly as they reached the lobby. "There's a cafe around the corner that makes excellent coffee. Would you like to continue our conversation?" The invitation surprised him. "I'd like that." The cafe was small and surprisingly quiet for midday Manhattan. At a corner table away from windows, Catherine ordered an espresso while Lucas chose regular coffee. "So," she said once they were settled, "tell me something not on your resume." "Like what?" "Like why you really want this job." Lucas considered deflecting but found himself answering honestly. "I have a daughter, Penny. She's 8, and she deserves more stability than I've been able to give her lately." "You're raising her alone?" "Yes. My wife, Rachel, died 3 years ago. Cancer." The words still caught in his throat. "Penny was 5. Catherine's professional demeanor softened. "That must be incredibly difficult." "Some days. Most days we do okay." Lucas surprised himself by adding, "Penny wants to be an astronaut, says she's going to build houses on Mars someday." Catherine smiled genuinely. "She sounds remarkable." "She is." Lucas realized he'd been talking only about himself. "What about you? What brought you to Winters Enterprises?" A careful look crossed Catherine's face. "I've been with the company for quite some time. Finance has always fascinated me. The patterns, the possibilities. She paused. I lost my parents young. Perhaps that's why I value security and control in my professional life. The admission created an unexpected bridge between them. Two people shaped by loss, finding different ways forward. Thank you, Lucas said suddenly. For what? For remembering me, from the street. Not many would. Catherine's eyes met his. Not many would have stopped to help. Lucas arrived at Winters Enterprises on Monday morning with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The security guard handed him an access badge with his photo already printed on it, then directed him to the 32nd floor. Ms. Winters requested you report directly to her office, the guard said, checking something off on his clipboard. Lucas blinked. Ms. Winters? I thought I'd be working for Catherine Palmer. That was the name she'd used during their interview. The guard looked confused. Ms. Palmer? No, you're assigned to Director Winters' Special Projects team. Says so right here. Stepping into the elevator, Lucas tried to make sense of this information. He'd assumed Catherine was a department director, not someone with a name matching the company itself. The doors opened to reveal a sleek reception area where a professionally dressed woman waited. Mr. Bennett, I'm Eliza, Ms. Winters' assistant. She's expecting you. As Eliza led him through an open workspace, Lucas noticed curious glances from employees at surrounding desks. Their whispers followed him down the hallway. That's the new guy reporting directly to Winters. How does someone with no connections land that position? I heard she personally requested him. When they reached Catherine's office, Lucas nearly stopped in his tracks. The spacious corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, and sitting behind an imposing desk was Catherine, not Palmer, but Winters, CEO of the entire company. She looked up from her computer and smiled. Lucas, welcome. Please, come in. When Eliza closed the door behind him, Lucas found his voice. You're Catherine Winters, the Catherine Winters. I am. She gestured to a chair. I apologize for the misdirection during our interview. I sometimes use Palmer when I want candid interactions without the weight of my position influencing the conversation. So when we had coffee, I was evaluating you for this position. Yes, your financial instincts are exceptional, and I need someone with both skill and integrity for this project. She handed him a folder. We're analyzing acquisition targets in sustainable energy. It requires discretion, which is why you'll report directly to me. Throughout the morning, Catherine briefed him on the project, her business acumen both impressive and slightly intimidating. Around noon, she ordered lunch for them in her office. I hope you like Thai food, she said, as her assistant brought in several containers. Actually, it's my favorite. Lucas was surprised by the coincidence. As they ate, their conversation drifted from work to more personal topics. Catherine mentioned a jazz album she'd been listening to, and Lucas's eyes lit up. Miles Davis? I have that same record. Vinyl? Catherine asked, looking genuinely pleased. It was my father's. He had quite a collection. They discovered other shared interests, historical biographies, hiking trails outside the city, and a mutual appreciation for classic films. The professional distance between them warmed with each revealed commonality. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine frequently appeared near Lucas's desk with questions that could easily have been emailed. She brought him into meetings where senior executives raised eyebrows at his presence, but his insights consistently proved valuable, silencing potential critics. For Lucas, the job was both challenging and rewarding. The salary allowed him to catch up on bills and arrange proper after-school care for Penny, though the longer hours meant adjustments to their routine. Does your boss call you a lot? Penny asked one evening as Lucas's phone chimed with another text from Catherine. Sometimes. Why? Because your face gets all happy when your phone makes noise, Penny observed with 8-year-old directness. Lucas quickly changed the subject, but Penny's observation lingered in his mind. Was his growing attachment to Catherine that obvious? 3 weeks into his new position, Lucas collected his mail to find an official-looking envelope. Inside was formal notification that the Harrisons had filed for custody of Penny, citing his persistent financial instability and inadequate living conditions, as documented by a private investigator they had hired. The paper trembled in his hands. They had been watching him during his worst financial moments. The notice mentioned his eviction warning, the times his electricity had been nearly shut off, even the occasions when Penny had been left with a neighbor while he interviewed for jobs. That night, after Penny was asleep, Lucas stared at his phone for a long time before making the call. "Lucas?" Catherine answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything all right?" "I'm sorry to call so late," he said, his voice strained. "I need some professional advice. My in-laws are suing for custody of Penny, and I don't know how I'm going to afford the legal fees." There was a pause on the line. "Tell me everything," Catherine said, her tone shifting from surprise to determination. Lucas didn't know that the woman listening carefully on the other end of the line had the resources to solve his problems with a single phone call. One night, Catherine stared out her penthouse window at the glittering Manhattan skyline, wine glass in hand. Her thoughts kept returning to Lucas, his integrity, his intelligence, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was meant to be a good deed, a project, a valuable employee, not someone who made her heart race whenever he walked into a room. She took a sip of wine and sighed. The deception that had seemed so reasonable at first now felt like a wall between them. Every day she revealed more of herself to Lucas, her real thoughts, genuine laughter, true opinions, than she had with anyone in years. Yet he still didn't know who she truly was. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Childcare emergency. Sitter sick. School closed tomorrow. Can we reschedule presentation?" Catherine stared at the message, an idea forming. Before she could overthink it, she typed, "Bring Penny to the office. We have a conference room you can set up in. Presentation too important to delay." His response came quickly. "Are you sure? I don't want to seem unprofessional." "I'm sure," she replied, ignoring the flutter in her chest at the thought of meeting his daughter. The next morning, Catherine found herself straightening her desk nervously before they arrived. When Lucas appeared at her door with a small, dark-haired girl beside him, Catherine felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. "Ms. Palmer, this is my daughter Penny," Lucas said. "Penny, this is my boss, Ms. Palmer." "It's Catherine, please," she corrected, kneeling to Penny's level. "I'm very happy to meet you, Penny. Your dad talks about you all the time." Penny studied her with intelligent eyes. "He talks about you too." Lucas cleared his throat, a blush creeping up his neck. "Penny has some homework to work on while I set up for the presentation." "I have the perfect spot," Catherine said, leading them to a small conference room she'd prepared with snacks and art supplies. After Lucas's presentation, which went brilliantly, Catherine found herself sitting beside Penny, helping with her math homework while Lucas finished some calculations for the project. "You're really good at math," Penny observed. "I've always liked numbers," Catherine admitted. "They make sense when people don't." Penny nodded solemnly. "Dad says the same thing." As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself drawn into Penny's world. They discussed Penny's science project on the solar system, shared opinions on the best ice cream flavors, and laughed over Penny's stories about school. Lucas watched them from across the room, something soft and vulnerable in his expression that made Catherine's chest tighten. Later, when Penny was absorbed in drawing, Lucas whispered, "Thank you for this. You're amazing with her." "She's easy to be amazing with," Catherine replied honestly. "She's extraordinary, Lucas. You've done an incredible job raising her." The pride and gratitude in his eyes made words stick in Catherine's throat. She almost told him then about who she really was, about her wealth, about how she could help with his custody battle. But then Lucas shook his head, looking at a text message. The Harrisons' lawyer again. They think they can just buy their way out of consequences, use their money to take what isn't theirs. His voice hardened. That's how wealthy people operate, isn't it? They think everything has a price tag. Catherine's confession died on her lips. Not all wealthy people, she managed. Maybe not, he conceded, but his tone suggested he hadn't met many exceptions. That evening, after Catherine had her driver take them home, claiming it was a company car service, Lucas tucked Penny into bed. "Dad?" Penny asked sleepily. "Could Catherine come over sometime? She's nice, and she makes you smile your real smile." Lucas brushed her hair back, touched by his daughter's observation. "We'll see, sweetheart. Now get some sleep." Across town, Catherine sat at her computer, researching the Harrisons. What she found disturbed her, a pattern of using financial leverage to control family members, including Lucas's late wife. They'd withdrawn financial support when she chose to marry Lucas instead of their approved candidate, then attempted to re-establish control after Penny's birth. Catherine closed her laptop, her resolve hardening. She could help Lucas fight them, but doing so would mean revealing her true identity and risking everything they'd built between them. The autumn chill had settled over Manhattan, leaving the Winters Enterprises building nearly empty as night descended. In the conference room on the 42nd floor, Lucas and Catherine sat surrounded by spreadsheets and financial projections, the only sounds the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional rustle of papers. "I think we're finally getting somewhere with these projections," Lucas said, sliding a document across the table. Catherine reached for it at the same moment, their fingers brushing over the glossy paper. The contact was brief, but electric. Neither pulled away immediately, both frozen by the unexpected intimacy of the touch. Lucas looked up, meeting Catherine's eyes. The professional mask she typically wore had slipped, revealing something vulnerable and wanting. Time seemed to stretch between them as he leaned forward slightly, drawn by an invisible force. Catherine's breath caught as she tilted her head, her lips parting slightly. The space between them narrowed, the air charged with unspoken desire. The door burst open with a cheerful, "Evening, folks! Just need to empty the bins." They jerked apart as the cleaning crew entered. The moment shattered. Catherine smoothed her skirt with trembling hands, while Lucas gathered papers with exaggerated focus, both avoiding eye contact as their cheeks flushed with equal parts disappointment and embarrassment. "We should probably call it a night," Catherine said softly, once they were alone again. Lucas nodded, unable to trust his voice, the almost kiss hanging between them like an unfinished sentence. The next morning, Lucas found an email in his inbox announcing the annual Winters Enterprises Gala, where the company would recognize outstanding achievements and contributions. His finger hovered over the delete button. Formal events weren't exactly in his budget when Catherine appeared beside his desk. "You're going, right?" she asked, her professional demeanor firmly back in place, though her eyes held the warmth of their shared secret. "I hadn't planned on it," Lucas admitted. "Not really my scene." "You should reconsider," Catherine insisted. "It's important to be seen at these events, for career advancement." What she didn't say was that she'd already arranged for his project work to be highlighted, planning to have him recognized publicly for his contributions. "I'll think about it," he promised, just as his phone buzzed with an incoming email. Later that afternoon, Lucas paced outside Catherine's office, his face drawn with tension. When she waved him in, he closed the door behind him. "I need to get out of this building," he said without preamble. "Can we walk? Talk somewhere that doesn't have glass walls?" 20 minutes later, they strolled through Central Park, golden leaves crunching beneath their feet. The autumn colors created a vibrant canopy above them, the setting sun casting everything in amber light. "The Harrisons sent a settlement offer," Lucas finally said, his voice tight. "They'll drop the custody suit if I agree to reduced visitation and accept financial support from them." His hands clenched into fists. They said my pride is hurting Penny, that by refusing their help, I'm depriving her of opportunities. Catherine's steps slowed. That's manipulative. They're trying to make you doubt yourself. But what if they're right? Vulnerability crept into his voice. What if I am putting my pride before her needs? Lucas, look at me. Catherine stopped, turning to face him beneath a canopy of red and gold leaves. What Penny needs most is you, your love, your guidance, your example. Money can't buy that. But it can buy security, opportunities. At what cost? Catherine's eyes flashed. The Harrisons have a history of using money to control people. They did it to your wife when she chose you over their approved candidate. They'd do the same to Penny. Lucas stared at her, confusion crossing his features. How do you know that about my wife? I never told you that. Catherine froze, realizing her mistake. You must have mentioned it, she said weakly. No, Lucas said slowly. I didn't. Before she could respond, Lucas continued, emotion overwhelming his suspicion. I can't lose her, Catherine. She's everything to me. The raw pain in his voice broke something open in Catherine. Without thinking, she reached for him, her hands framing his face. You won't lose her. Your devotion to Penny is worth more than all their money. Their eyes locked, the fountain beside them creating a gentle soundtrack to the moment. Lucas leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that started tentative but quickly deepened with months of suppressed longing. For one perfect moment, the world fell away. No custody battles, no corporate hierarchies, no secrets, just two people connecting in the most fundamental way. When they finally pulled apart, reality came rushing back. Lucas's eyes widened as he stepped back slightly. I shouldn't have done that, he whispered. You're my boss. This isn't... I wanted you to, Catherine admitted, still close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. But doubt had crept in, not just about workplace propriety, but about her unexplained knowledge of his personal life. The perfect moment had passed, leaving questions in its wake. The evening of the Winters Enterprises gala arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Lucas stood before the mirror in his apartment bathroom, adjusting the borrowed suit jacket that his colleague Martin had insisted he take. It's my backup, Martin had said. Italian wool makes anyone look like $1 million. Lucas wasn't sure about looking like $1 million, but the suit fit surprisingly well. He ran a nervous hand through his freshly trimmed hair as Penny watched from the doorway. You look like a prince, Daddy, she said, her eyes wide with approval. He smiled, kneeling to her level. And you'll be good for Mrs. Rodriguez tonight. Penny nodded solemnly. Will Catherine be there? The question made his heart skip. Yes, she will. Good, Penny said, with the certainty of an 8-year-old matchmaker. She makes you smile. The grand ballroom of the Astoria Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and the subtle wealth of Manhattan's business elite. Lucas stood at the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed, until he spotted Catherine across the room. She wore a midnight blue gown that seemed to capture starlight, her chestnut hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. When she turned and saw him, her smile transformed her face from merely beautiful to breathtaking. You came, she said, approaching him with genuine delight. I almost didn't recognize you, Lucas admitted, taking in her transformation from the professional woman he knew to this vision in blue. Is that good or bad? Catherine asked, a rare hint of uncertainty in her voice. Definitely good, he assured her, fighting the urge to touch her. They moved through the crowd together, maintaining a professional distance that fooled no one. Colleagues exchanged knowing glances as Catherine introduced Lucas to various department heads, her hand occasionally brushing his arm in a gesture that seemed both casual and deliberate. Bennett certainly made an impression on the director, Lucas overheard someone murmur. Lucky bastard, came the reply. But you have to admit, he's got something. Did you see the quarterly projections he developed? The evening took on a dreamlike quality as they shared inside jokes over champagne and moved instinctively in sync. During dinner, seated at a table with senior management, their knees touched beneath the tablecloth, sending a current through Lucas that made it difficult to focus on conversation. As dessert was served, the lights dimmed slightly. The master of ceremonies approached the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our CEO to present this year's Innovation Awards, Catherine Winters." Lucas froze, his fork suspended midway to his mouth. He turned to the empty chair beside him, then back to the stage where Catherine, his Catherine, was walking confidently toward the podium in her stunning gown. The room erupted in applause while Lucas sat in stunned silence. The woman he'd been falling for, the woman he'd kissed in the park, the woman he'd confided in about his deepest fears, was Catherine Winters, the reclusive billionaire CEO of Winters Enterprises. Catherine took her place at the podium, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found his. The flicker of apprehension on her face told him she recognized his shock. "At Winters Enterprises, we've always valued character over credentials," she began, her composed voice belying the tension Lucas could now see in her shoulders. "True innovation comes from people who see possibilities where others see problems." As she continued her speech, presenting awards to various employees, Lucas felt as though he were underwater, her words reaching him through a distorting medium. Every moment between them replayed in his mind with this new context. Had he been a charity case, a social experiment? When the awards concluded and the music resumed, Lucas stood abruptly. He couldn't bear to hear her explanation, couldn't face the humiliation of being the only person in the room who hadn't known who she really was. He was halfway to the exit when he felt her hand on his arm. "Lucas, please, let me explain." He turned, meeting her eyes. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me since the moment we met? That you watched me struggle and worry about money while you—" He stopped, unable to continue. "It wasn't like that," Catherine said, her composure cracking. "I wanted you to know me, not my position." "I don't even know who you are," Lucas replied quietly, pulling away and continuing toward the exit. The next morning, an elaborate flower arrangement arrived at his desk with a handwritten note. "Please let me explain. K." Lucas placed the note in his drawer without responding. By afternoon, 3 messages from Catherine waited in his voicemail, each more urgent than the last. Instead of returning her calls, Lucas submitted a formal request for transfer to another department. He couldn't quit. Penny's needs came first, and this job was their lifeline, but he couldn't face Catherine daily with this sense of betrayal burning in his chest. Across the building, Catherine sat alone in her executive office, staring at her unanswered messages. For the first time in her adult life, her wealth and power offered no solution. In fact, they were the very barriers keeping her from what she truly wanted: Lucas's trust, his respect, his heart. The irony wasn't lost on her. Everything that had made her successful in business had failed her completely in matters of the heart. Lucas developed a sixth sense for Catherine's presence over the following week. He'd feel the air change in a room seconds before she entered, giving him just enough time to find an urgent reason to be elsewhere. The executive floor, once unfamiliar territory, became a map of escape routes in his mind. Each morning, a new note waited on his desk. Never demanding, always brief. "I understand your anger. I'm truly sorry. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. I never meant to hurt you." He read each one, then tucked them into his desk drawer with the others, unsure why he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. His colleagues treated him differently now. Conversations stopped when he approached, resuming with artificial casualness that fooled no one. "Bennett," Thompson from accounting called across the break room. "Heard you're moving to the 3rd floor. Guess the executive view loses its appeal when you've already got the CEO's ear, huh?" The implication was clear. Everyone assumed he'd known exactly who Catherine was, that he'd somehow leveraged their relationship for advancement. "My transfer request is still pending," Lucas replied stiffly, abandoning his half-made coffee. When his phone rang that afternoon, Lucas expected another call from Catherine. Instead, he heard the clipped tones of Harrington, the Harrisons' attorney. "Mr. Bennett, some concerning information has come to our attention regarding your relationship with your employer." Lucas's stomach clenched. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come now, Mr. Bennett. Your sudden employment at Winters Enterprises, your special position reporting directly to Ms. Winters herself. It appears rather opportunistic. Wouldn't you agree? The courts generally frown upon parents who use romantic relationships for financial gain." The accusation left Lucas speechless with fury. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse, his cell phone lit up with Penny's school number. "I need to take another call," he said abruptly, switching lines. "Hello? Mr. Bennett, this is Nurse Garland at Lakeside Elementary. Penny's running a fever of 101. She needs to be picked up immediately." 20 minutes later, Lucas rushed through the school's front entrance, nearly colliding with Catherine coming from the opposite direction. They froze, staring at each other for the first time since the gala. Catherine recovered first. "The school called my office when they couldn't reach you." "I was on another call," Lucas said stiffly. "You didn't need to come." "I was worried." The simple honesty in her voice made it hard to maintain his anger. Before he could respond, the nurse appeared with Penny, who looked miserable, but brightened slightly at the sight of Catherine. "You both came," she croaked, her voice raspy. Lucas knelt beside her. "How are you feeling, Peanut?" "My throat hurts, and I'm cold." She leaned against him, radiating heat through her clothes. "Let's get you home," he said, lifting her. To Catherine, he added reluctantly, "Thank you for coming, but we'll be fine." "Can Catherine come too?" Penny asked, her feverish eyes pleading. "She tells the best stories." Lucas hesitated, trapped between his daughter's request and his own wounded pride. Catherine saved him from answering. "Only if your dad says it's okay," she said quietly. "I don't want to intrude." The sincerity in her eyes broke through some of his resistance. "Fine," he conceded, unable to disappoint Penny. But just until she settled. In their small apartment, Lucas became acutely aware of how different it was from Catherine's world. The worn furniture, the cramped kitchen, the water stain on the ceiling he hadn't had time to fix, all of it a stark contrast to the luxury she inhabited daily. Yet Catherine moved through the space with ease, helping Penny change into pajamas while Lucas prepared medicine and called the pediatrician. Hours later, with Penny finally asleep, they sat at the small kitchen table, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. "I should go," Catherine said, but made no move to leave. "Why did you lie to me?" Lucas asked suddenly, his voice low to avoid waking Penny. Catherine's fingers tightened around her mug. "I didn't plan to, not at first, but then..." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "People treat me differently when they know who I am. They see the wealth, the position, never just me. When you helped me that day, not knowing who I was, it was the first genuine interaction I'd had in years. So I was some kind of social experiment?" "No," she said firmly. "You were a chance to be known for myself, not my bank account. I kept meaning to tell you, but the longer I waited..." "The harder it got," Lucas finished, understanding despite himself. "Yes." She met his eyes directly. "I was wrong to deceive you, but what grew between us was real, Lucas, at least for me." Lucas rubbed his face tiredly. "Even if I believe you, how can I trust you now? Especially with everything else at stake." He gestured toward Penny's room. "The Harrisons are already using our relationship against me in the custody case." Catherine's expression hardened. "They what?" Before Lucas could elaborate, a small voice interrupted them. "Dad, is Catherine your girlfriend?" They turned to find Penny standing in the doorway, looking slightly less feverish but still fragile. The innocent question hung in the air between them, highlighting everything unresolved. Lucas looked at Catherine, seeing the same confusion and longing he felt reflected in her eyes. Lucas stared at the stack of legal documents spread across his kitchen table, the weight of the upcoming custody hearing pressing down on him. 3 days. Just 3 days until he'd stand before a judge and fight for his daughter. The lawyer's hourly rates might as well have been in another currency, one reserved for people who vacationed in the Hamptons and had investment portfolios. "You can do this," he muttered to himself, highlighting another paragraph about parental fitness standards. Self-representation wasn't ideal, but he had no choice. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mr. Bennett? This is Olivia Ramirez from Caldwell & Associates. I understand you have an upcoming custody hearing." Lucas frowned. "How did you get my information?" "We're a family law firm that occasionally takes on pro bono cases. Yours was referred to us as deserving special consideration." "By whom?" Lucas asked suspiciously. "The referral is confidential, but I assure you there are no strings attached. We'd like to represent you in your custody battle with the Harrisons." Lucas's mind immediately went to Catherine. It had been 2 weeks since the night at his apartment with Penny's innocent question hanging between them. They'd maintained a careful professional distance since then, but this had her fingerprints all over it. After a moment's hesitation, he agreed to meet with the attorney. Pride wouldn't help keep Penny. Sunday afternoon, Lucas paced outside the Harrisons' Upper East Side brownstone, checking his watch repeatedly. Penny's supervised visit was running 15 minutes over schedule. When the ornate front door finally opened, Penny emerged clutching a brand new tablet, wearing clothes he'd never seen before. "Daddy!" She ran to him, her excitement palpable. "Look what Grandma and Grandpa got me, and they said when I visit next weekend, we can go see ponies at their friend's farm. They might get me one." Lucas forced a smile. "That's something, Peanut." Mrs. Harrison appeared in the doorway, her cashmere sweater probably worth more than Lucas's entire wardrobe. "We've enrolled her in an art class at the Children's Museum. The instructor is a former Guggenheim Fellow." The unspoken comparison to Penny's public school art program hung in the air. "Thank you for your generosity," Lucas managed, taking Penny's hand. "We should get going." In the subway heading home, Penny chattered about the Harrisons' wine cellar converted to a playroom, the chef who made her Mickey Mouse pancakes, and the promise of private swimming lessons. Back at their apartment, Penny looked around the small living room with new eyes. "Dad?" she asked, setting down her tablet. "Why can't we live with Grandma and Grandpa? They have more room, and they said I could have my own bathroom." The question hit Lucas like a physical blow. He knelt to her level, choosing his words carefully. "Penny, having nice things and big rooms is wonderful, but that's not what makes a home." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "A home is where people love you for exactly who you are, not what you have or what you wear." Penny considered this. "But don't Grandma and Grandpa love me?" "They do," Lucas said honestly. "But sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about what's important. I believe what's most important is that you grow up knowing you're loved for being you, not for having fancy things." Penny nodded slowly, then wrapped her arms around his neck. "I like our apartment. It's cozy." Lucas held her tight, blinking back tears. "It is cozy, isn't it?" Later that evening, a soft knock at the door surprised Lucas. He opened it to find Catherine standing there, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked remarkably like she had that first day on the street. Just a woman, not a CEO. "Hi," she said softly, holding up grocery bags. "I thought maybe I could cook dinner, just Catherine tonight, not CEO Winters." Lucas hesitated, then stepped aside. "Penny's already asleep." Catherine moved into the small kitchen, unpacking ingredients. I hope you like pasta carbonara. It's one of the few things I actually know how to make. You cook? Lucas leaned against the counter, watching her. Rarely. But yes. She smiled tentatively. Not everything in my life involves personal chefs. They worked side by side in the cramped kitchen, their arms occasionally brushing. The familiar attraction hummed between them as Catherine chopped garlic and Lucas grated cheese. I know it was you, he said finally. The lawyer. Catherine didn't deny it. You deserve fair representation. I can't repay you. I don't want repayment. She set down her knife, turning to face him. Lucas, my whole life, people have wanted me for what I could give them. Money, connections, status. No one has ever just wanted me. The vulnerability in her eyes stripped away the last of his resistance. I'm terrified of losing her, he admitted, his voice breaking. The Harrisons can give her everything I can't. Except you, Catherine said, stepping closer. They can't give her you. In the small space between the refrigerator and stove, Catherine reached up to touch his face. I'm sorry I wasn't honest from the beginning, but everything between us was real, is real. Lucas looked down at her, not Catherine Winters, billionaire CEO, but just Catherine, a woman with her own fears and hopes. I know, he whispered, and bent to kiss her. Her arms slid around his neck as she pressed against him, the kiss deepening with all the emotion they'd held back. When they finally parted, Catherine rested her forehead against his. We'll figure this out, she promised. Together. For the first time in weeks, Lucas believed it might be possible. The morning of the custody hearing dawned with gray skies that matched Lucas's mood. He straightened his tie in the mirror, rehearsing arguments in his head, while Catherine's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane, reviewed documents at his kitchen table. We've built a strong case, Diane assured him. The judge will see that Penny's best interests lie with you. Lucas nodded, checking his watch. The Harrisons should be dropping Penny at school now. I'll pick her up after the hearing. His phone rang, Penny's school. His stomach dropped as he answered. Mr. Bennett, Penny wasn't in morning attendance. The Harrisons didn't bring her in today. Lucas's hands went cold. He immediately dialed the Harrisons, but got voicemail on both their numbers. As panic rose in his throat, his phone lit up with Penny's name, the emergency phone he'd given her. Daddy? Her voice was small, frightened. Penny, where are you? Grandma and Grandpa said we're going to their house in the Hamptons, but I'm supposed to be at school. They took my tablet, but I hid my phone like you showed me. Lucas heard Mrs. Harrison's voice in the background. Penelope? Who are you talking to? I have to go, Penny whispered urgently. They said we're staying there until after the court thing. The line went dead. Lucas stared at the phone, fury and fear battling inside him. The court hearing was in 90 minutes. If he missed it, the judge would likely rule in the Harrisons' favor by default. They've taken her, he told Diane, already grabbing his keys. They're heading to the Hamptons to make me miss the hearing. Catherine arrived just as he was explaining. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone. Michael, I need the helicopter ready in 15 minutes, she said crisply. Yes, immediately. She turned to Diane. Call Judge Winters. No relation. Explain the situation and request a delay. If that fails, begin without us, but stall as long as legally possible. Lucas stared at her. Catherine, I can't ask you to, You're not asking. Her eyes were fierce with determination. I'm offering. This is what partners do. 30 minutes later, they were airborne in Catherine's private helicopter, racing toward the Hamptons, while Diane fought for time in the courtroom. I've been investigating the Harrisons, Catherine shouted over the rotor noise, handing Lucas a file. They did the same thing to Penny's mother, used money to control her. There are 3 separate incidents where they threatened to cut her off financially if she didn't comply with their wishes. Lucas scanned the documents, seeing his late wife's struggles in a new light. They're doing it again, using money as a weapon. Not this time, Catherine said firmly. Not with Penny. The helicopter landed on a private helipad near the Harrisons' summer mansion. They sprinted to Catherine's waiting car, reaching the estate in minutes. When the housekeeper answered the door, Lucas pushed past her. "Penny," he called. "Daddy!" Penny came running from the sunroom, flinging herself into his arms. The Harrisons appeared, Mr. Harrison's face flushing with anger. "This is a private residence. You're trespassing. Taking my daughter without permission during a custody dispute." Lucas kept his voice steady despite his rage. "That's parental interference. It's illegal. We simply wanted quality time with our granddaughter," Mrs. Harrison said smoothly. "You're overreacting. By coincidentally scheduling this quality time during the custody hearing." Catherine stepped forward. "The court has been notified of your actions." "Who do you think you are?" Mr. Harrison demanded. "I'm Catherine Winters," she said, standing shoulder to shoulder with Lucas. "And more importantly, I'm someone who cares about Penny's well-being more than winning control over her." Lucas kept his arm around Penny. "We're leaving now, and you'll explain to the judge why you attempted to sabotage these proceedings." "You can't provide what we can," Mrs. Harrison insisted, gesturing around the opulent home. "Penny deserves better." "Penny deserves to be loved for who she is," Lucas replied firmly. "Not used as a pawn." Catherine placed a gentle hand on Penny's shoulder. "And she deserves adults who respect each other enough to put her needs first." Together, the 3 of them walked out, a united front against manipulation and control. After a few days, the courtroom fell silent as the doors swung open. Lucas and Catherine entered with Penny between them, the little girl's hand firmly clasped in her father's. The Harrisons' lawyer was mid-sentence, arguing about the respondent's absence, when he turned to see them approaching. "Your Honor," Catherine's attorney announced, "Mr. Bennett has arrived with his daughter, who was improperly removed from school this morning by the petitioners." Judge Winters, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, looked over her glasses at the Harrisons. "Is this true?" Before their lawyer could respond, Catherine stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may?" "I witnessed the events firsthand. The Harrisons took Penny to their Hamptons home without permission, deliberately timing it to make Mr. Bennett miss today's hearing." "And you are?" the judge asked. "Catherine Winters, CEO of Winters Enterprises." She stood tall beside Lucas. "And I'm in a relationship with Lucas Bennett." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The Harrisons' lawyer immediately pounced. "Your Honor, this proves our point. Mr. Bennett is clearly using his relationship with Ms. Winters, one of the wealthiest women in New York, to influence these proceedings." Lucas tensed, but Catherine placed a steady hand on his arm. "Actually," she said clearly, "it was Lucas's integrity that brought us together. 3 months ago, he stopped to help a stranger, me, who had dropped her groceries on a busy sidewalk. He was rushing to a job interview at my company, but he chose to help anyway." Her voice carried through the courtroom. "That decision made him late, and he lost the opportunity. He had no idea who I was and expected nothing in return. That's the kind of man raising Penny Bennett." She handed the judge a folder. "This contains evidence of the Harrisons' history of using financial leverage to control family members, including their late daughter. Today's attempt to remove Penny from school without authorization follows this pattern." The judge reviewed the documents carefully, while Penny sat between Lucas and Catherine, small fingers intertwined with both of theirs. After deliberation, Judge Winters delivered her ruling. Custody will remain with Lucas Bennett. The Harrisons will be granted visitation on alternating weekends, supervised for the first 3 months. She looked directly at the grandparents. Financial stability is important, but a child needs more than material advantages. Mr. Bennett has demonstrated consistent prioritization of his daughter's emotional well-being. The Harrisons' faces fell as Lucas exhaled with relief. Catherine squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. Outside the courtroom, Penny hugged her father tightly. "Does this mean I stay with you, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart. Always." 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the windows of Catherine's penthouse as the three of them sat around the breakfast table. Penny, tongue poking out in concentration, worked on a school project spread across the table. "What are you drawing there?" Catherine asked, pouring coffee for herself and Lucas. "It's for my How My Family Began project," Penny explained, holding up her artwork. "See? That's Daddy helping you pick up oranges. That's where our family started." The drawing showed a sidewalk with scattered oranges, 2 stick figures reaching for the same one, their hands touching. Lucas and Catherine exchanged smiles over Penny's head. "I have something for you," Lucas said to Catherine, pulling a small wrapped box from his pocket. Catherine unwrapped it carefully to find an orange-shaped keychain with a single key attached. "What's this?" she asked, turning the key in her fingers. "It's to our new home," Lucas said softly. "I found a place halfway between Penny's school and the office. 3 bedrooms, a backyard for that dog she keeps asking for." He smiled. "A place that can be ours, together." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "When I set out to find someone who would value me beyond my wealth, I never imagined finding a family where I belong so completely." Penny looked up from her drawing. "Does this mean we're really going to be a family?" "We already are," Lucas answered, reaching for both their hands across the table. "We have been since the moment I stopped to help with those oranges. If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone."